what is to live in the occupied territory. You have no freedom, and you in constant risk of being tortured, arrested, killed, etc. So you cannot express your views openly. You live in a hostile environment where everyone, when you're very suspicious to everyone, and when you understand that you are rightless, you have absolutely no right.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of On the Edge with Philip Ittner. Sadly, this week we're going to be discussing a topic we have explored several times in several different ways previously, and that is the war crimes that Russia is committing here daily. However, we're going to be looking at this in a different way this time. And it is something that is largely happening in the shadows. We're going to be talking about what's going on the other side of the line, inside Russian-occupied Ukraine. And this is not easy to discuss because it's hard to get any kind of proof out. It's incredibly dangerous to do that. Additionally, people aren't being let go, especially those who have been victims of these crimes. We're speaking with Lisa Sukarenko, who investigates and documents these crimes as quickly as she possibly can, because ultimately, eventually, there must be accountability. Also, this allows us to look into another aspect of everything that's happening here. Why are the Ukrainians fighting as hard as they are? Well, it's because they know that each kilometer that they have to cede to Russia means more of their compatriots who will suffer under the thumb of Moscow. And also, it explains why they're so adamant that those lands currently on the other side of the line must be liberated, and not a single Ukrainian can be left behind. These are hard tales to hear, but they are important. So, Lisa, thank you very much for coming today. You are involved in documenting and investigating crimes committed by Russians and Moscow's forces here. What kind of crimes do you see being committed? Let's go with first within the occupied territories of Ukraine. What kind of things are you hearing?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Do I need to introduce myself?
No.
I'm sorry.
I'll do that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so the organization I represent is MINA, which means change. If we translate it in English, is working on documenting international crimes committed by Russia since the full-scale invasion. Yet we were involved in the monitoring of the human rights violation in the occupied territories of Ukraine since the war began in 2014. So for the last 3 years, we've been mostly focusing on specific types of international crimes, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. These are torture and inhumane treatment, arbitrary detentions, and enforced disappearances of civilians in the occupied territories of Kharkiv, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions. Mm-hmm. Our organization is also working with the occupied territory of Crimea, as well as Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Mm-hmm. Still, my focus are those 3 regions that I mentioned: Kharkiv, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Mm-hmm. So,
and those are all along kind of the frontline areas.
Yes.
Those are the cities closest to the fighting.
Yeah. So we started to conduct field missions to the liberated territories of Kharkiv and Kherson region back in autumn 2022. So we've been visiting Izum, Borova, like the whole. I think most of the settlements and cities of Kharkiv region that were under Russia's occupation, as well as the big part of Kherson region
Mhm.
and Kherson itself. So how do we work? Mostly we receive the information by conducting in-depth interviews with the survivors of Russia's crimes. And we have like a specific methodology that was created with the help of the World Organization Against Torture, OMCT. This organization is our big partner, and they like helped us with the capacity building on how to properly document crime of torture and inhumane treatment. So this methodology is based on Istanbul Protocol. This is like the guidance on how to document and investigate torture, an international guide. And also this methodology is based on the different guides on how to document human rights violation, and especially in the situation of war conflict.
And is this mostly testimonials? So you record the stories of the people, any physical evidence of torture, injuries, things like this? Is that the kind of thing?
Yes, that is the kind of thing. But yeah, like for you to understand that when we come, lots of people that were tortured didn't already have like the visible signs of torture. Like some had, but most of them did not have those signs. And in the situation when the settlement or the city was under the occupation, there was a huge risk for the survivors after they were released from the place of illegal detention to seek any medical aid. So we even have cases when a person went to a hospital after the person was released by Russians, after being held by Russians, and he came to a hospital and he was seeking for like any medical assistance, even the fact that someone will document that he had an injuries that as a result of torture would be a good evidence. But still, after he came, Russian soldiers or probably the FSB officers came to this hospital, and they were asking about whether some people were addressing this hospital that were are claiming that they have traumas that are the result of torture. So it was very dangerous even to keep any documents about that do have names of the persons. So because after that, the Russians will search for this person, and they will they can imprison this person again, or they can threaten this person, etc. So yeah.
Well, the problem is the hospital is still in the occupied territories. So the hospital that they visit is going to be susceptible to Russian soldiers or FSB. It must, what I think I would like to learn more about is those people who escape occupied territories and return to Ukrainian-held territories, because they're going to tell one story to a Russian-held hospital and another one to a Ukrainian hospital. Do you find that happens a lot?
I was talking about those territories that were under occupied and that were liberated. Still, there were lots of pro-Ukrainian doctors, even when the
that's a brave thing
settlement
to do,
was still under the occupation.
It's a brave thing to do.
They were trying to help those people who were tortured by Russians. Still, they also endangered themselves. But yeah, so they did tell this. We have case when I won't go into the details. I will answer your question. So of course, the people in the occupied territories can there is a huge atmosphere of fear, and you don't know who you can trust or who you cannot trust, especially if you're having some connection with authorities. So Russia did a lot to create this atmosphere of fear. So neighbors do not believe their neighbors, friends and do not believe their friends, and lots You probably heard lots about this torture chambers, we call it in Ukrainian, like the places of illegal detention of civilians and prisoners of war. So even the existence in the city of such places, it wasn't hidden. Like the Russians wanted to know, wanted the population of the city to know that there are such places and to know about crimes and horrible things that are happening there with people. So other will be afraid of to in one point become one of those who are held in those facilities.
I was in Kherson shortly after it was liberated. Well, not shortly, but after it was liberated. And, if you want to know anything in a city, you go and you talk to the babusha.
Yeah.
She's the one that knows everything, sitting in the courtyard. They watch everything. So I spoke to these women one time, and it's very similar to what you describe, is that they wanted people to know that there was a torture center in this building or that building, because then the torture is not just the individual that's being tortured, but rather the entire population.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more about the kind of crimes that are committed, including torture. But I want to hear not only about what happened to the individuals, but how Russians terrorize the community that they occupy. Is that something maybe you can talk to?
Well, yes, I can. Yes, I can. But the torture is one of the elements, actually. So at the human rights organization, we also, we do not only conduct in-depth interviews and to look for the information and the open sources. We also use this information to provide a legal analysis of what we have documented. And we are working on, in this process, we are working together with our Ukrainian colleagues from the Media Initiative for Human Rights and with the MCT. And we see that Russia has committed a crime of persecution of civilian population in the occupied territories of Ukraine. And this may amount to crime against humanity. So the use of torture, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings, deportation, forced transfer of people between the occupied territories was widespread and systematic. So this was a part of Russia's pre-planned policy of intimidating the civilian population of Ukraine. This policy was aimed to suppress any possible resistance in the occupied territories and to submit the population to the administration of the Russian Federation that was established in the occupied territories.
So explain to me how that happens. A Russian force goes into a small town in Kherson Oblast or Zaporizhia Oblast. What are the first things that they do when they enter into a new territory?
We heard from thousands of people that when Russians comes to the settlement, they already have lists of those who were serving in the Ukrainian army, those who were famous pro-Ukrainian activists, those who were working in law enforcement agencies.
Yeah,
etc. So in the various settlements, in the various cities that were under occupation, Russians already had those lists of who they will attack, so to say, first. Then you probably heard about the filtration camps, about the system of filtration, and it was the point of the goal of the filtration was to sort people who might have connections with the Ukrainian army, who might have connections with Ukrainian representative of law enforcement, with the representatives of local government, etc. So they were even asked, and this filtration processes that they have a list of questions they were asking a person, and like, how do you treat so-called special military operation? What do you think about the Russians? Like, this was all aimed to find any person that do not like, who is disloyal, so-called disloyal to Russia.
In their mind.
In their, of course, in their mind. So there was a specific group that was attacked first, like I already mentioned some of them, and then as the invasion progressed, this group became much broader. So you didn't need to have a pro-Ukrainian positions or view to be arrested by Russians. So they was just, during the interrogations, they were always asking a person, so you can tell me 10 names of, for example, pro-Ukrainians, 10 former military of Ukrainian army, and you will be released. Like, so they were forcing people to доносити.
To tell on other people.
Betray.
Sorry. Yeah,
betray. Yeah. Well, this is what they do.
Yeah.
This is their, because again, that also then spreads more terror among, and they ask these questions, it's my understanding, with the implied threat of violence. If you don't give us 10 names, we're going to put you in a torture cell. Is that accurate to the stories you're hearing?
And like, the threat was the least of what happened to a person. Like, in most cases, the person was first heavily beaten or tortured with the electric current. So this is one of the widespread methods of torture, like severe beatings and the use
elephant,
of electricity.
There's a widespread technique they call, I believe, the elephant.
You mean
with the gas mask?
It's not as the most spread. It's one of them.
Where they take the Russian gas mask is this antiquated thing that's got a long thing and it looks kind of like an elephant. And so there are these stories of cutting off your gas supply, your air supply, but there's so many other brutal techniques they use.
The most so-called popular technique is the use of electric current. Like, so
No, it's I know where, because I've heard these stories before and they're very disturbing.
Different types, like they were carrying electric shocks, like the machine that can beat you with the electricity. And they had this thing they called topic. It's an old field telephone. Like,
yes, I've heard of this. So, this is awful.
And they were connecting like some elements to your body.
Sensitive parts of your body. Sensitive
parts of your body, like nose, like ears, tongue, genitalia. So the sexualized torture is
also
pretty
a major
issue
we've heard of. Yes. Yeah.
So
and they wind it up. It gets enough charge, and then they release the charge on sensitive parts of your body.
Yes. It's lasted till the person like blackout. It cannot be lasted.
And it's interesting you mention the sexualization of torture, because this is a common theme we've heard. Without getting too graphic, how much of that is part of their methods of torture? There's a sexual cruelty element to it.
So I would say, based on our experience, like on the data we have collected, the sexualized torture are like 25% of the whole 100% of torture we documented. So it's actually pretty widespread.
Every fourth person is tortured sexually.
And we need to understand that not every person can easily talk about it. Not every person can, like during the interview, someone do not want to talk about it, do not want to mention that. And we have like cases when we know that person, that the sexualized torture was tortured like with the use of electric shocks to genitalia, but the person do not want to talk about it, and we're not forcing the person to do that. So yeah, I was also wanted to come back to the question of how did Russia were looking for who to
Mhm.
illegally arrest. And we outlined a specific list of markers that Russians were looking for. It's like if you have some subscriptions on Ukrainian news outlets in your like messengers, if you have some pictures with the Ukrainian symbolics in your phone, if you have like someone, if you have like been talking, even talking Ukrainian, and their list is actually
If you even
huge.
spoke Ukrainian?
Yes. So we also have documented cases when the person, like the person was not she, he was illegally detained, and he was during the interrogation he was speaking Ukrainian, and he was severely beaten with some kind of tube. Because of he was speaking answering Ukrainian. So there are thousands of such cases. Yeah.
Yeah, and you say that they originally came in and they would do military leaders, government leaders, connections to law enforcement, these kind of things, but then it spread out. Talk to me a little. I've heard stories of them targeting certain religious groups. That they just anything that is not Russian Orthodox, they target. Is there truth to that?
I would say that I'm not very into this, but there are in Ukraine there are organizations that are working that do have a specific focus on that. And in our practice, we had cases when, like for example, there was a priest in Kherson region, and he refused to become a Russian. He refused to change his church to a Russian Orthodox church, and he was illegally detained. And in several days, Russian officials came to him, to his wife, and said that he died in detention. So also we had cases when a person was treated inhumane because of he was like one of the Protestants, I suppose Baptist. So yes, for sure you know about the witnesses of Jehovah that are persecuted in the territory of Russian Federation. Still, unfortunately, I'm not the one who can give you the full credible information about that, but unfortunately, yeah, that is an issue that Russia. Yes, we do know that.
And the other thing that they seem to expand it out past that original, those original groups, is also places where children are where they're collected either at a school or at some sort of cultural center or something. We've heard stories of the Russians going into towns and saying, "Where are the children?" Because of course one of the other crimes they commit is taking children and
deportation.
Yeah, and the deportation into Russia. Is that also stuff that either you yourself have documented or your group or other groups you've heard about?
Yes. We have some researchers about the deportation of kids. Still, it would be, sound very luckily, this is the topic that is in focus, in focus of international community, in a focus of the International Criminal Court. So the arrest warrants were issued to Lvova Belova and Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Because of the deportation of children, especially. So yes, this is a huge problem, and it's it's the problem causes lots of more problems because some children that were deported to the territory of Russia were from this sirotinets. I'm sorry, they didn't have parents and they were in a social facility. So I forgot the word.
Orphanage.
Orphans, yeah. And they were illegally adopted in the territory of Russia, and these children were very small and they get used to the Russian that illegally adopted them. And what you need to focus on that the interests of a kid are first of all. So Russia commits the crime of deportation. Russians illegally adopt a child, but still the child like got used to to them, and how like the child's identity will be erased, and we need to think about the interest of the kid. Like, so this is a huge topic, and the deportation of children will lead us to lots of problem, like erasing identity is one of them. And
well, and sadly, after 10 years of being held in Russia, they're even now being indoctrinated to hate Ukrainians. And, you know, if you were 10 in 2014 in Donetsk and Russia has taught you to hate Ukrainians, now you have Ukrainians, children who grew up to be Russian soldiers, because they were indoctrinated, yes, are now fighting Ukrainian soldiers.
Unfortunately, yes. So not only indoctrination, but the militarization of Ukrainian children in the occupied territories. Like we see that lots of law enforcement of Russia are involved in this. Like there is this investigative committee, Следчий комитет, and I think every month they have like meetings at school with kids where they're talking about what do they do and how good is the work of a Russian investigative committee that is involved in committing of war crimes in the territory of Ukraine.
And then they tell them that your former countrymen in Ukraine have been taken over, and they're all now banderovцы and
Nazis, etc.
Yeah. But I think it's also important for my audience to understand the other kind of things that they do when they occupy a territory to try and remove the Ukrainian identity. They force you to take a Russian passport, and that means that unless you have one, you won't get a pension. You won't. We hear stories of being refused medical attention. Even newborn children are taken away from their mothers if their mothers do not renounce their Ukrainian passports and take a Russian passport. Explain to my audience what kind of pressure that is in effect environmental torture, because you're doing this to a population that the Russians enforce upon Ukrainians when they occupy a territory. How do they try to destroy Ukrainian identity?
I think you know it's better than I do.
Well,
I'm joking. Yeah, you highlighted the most used methods, like the forced passportization. In case you do not have Russian passport, you will be cut off social, medical, and other kind of assistance. Like, so we have cases when a family was forced to leave their village that is in the occupied territory of Kherson, because they was the only ones who remained with the Ukrainian citizenship. They didn't want to take Russian passports, and they were constantly under attack by Russian officers. They were threatened. They were like the man from this family was illegally detained. He was tortured and severely beaten. Like, so they Russians gave them a condition that they have like few days to leave the occupied territory. So they Russians kicked this family away from their own home. Like, this is what Russia is doing. Unfortunately, we see that even you also mentioned the forced mobilization. You were talking about kids, but still there is a forced mobilization of men in the occupied territories. And they're trying to mobilize the Ukrainians to fight against the Ukrainians. And that is actually awful. So, yeah.
And
I would, yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to give probably an understanding of how it is to leave, because we do receive lots of requests from journalists, like, can you contact us from someone who remained in the occupation and who can tell us about the situation over there, like about facts of human rights violation. And actually, this sounds quite like this shows that they do not understand what is to live in the occupied territory. You are under 24/7 control of the Russian administration, Russia's security services, and Russia's military. There are still house-to-house raids. The Russians are checking electronic devices of people. They even recently there was an information that they trying to on a legislative level, like they want to follow the IP addresses. They want to control an internet activity of a person. So it's
monitoring. They
monitoring.
Want to monitor everything.
Yes.
How much? Also, another psychological form of torture is that you briefly mentioned it earlier, is turning neighbor against neighbor, because they incentivize people to turn their neighbors in, because if you don't turn your neighbors in and you're found out that you didn't, you're responsible then. It spreads the fear and it turns neighbor against neighbor.
Yes, so
that's not how it is in Ukraine.
No, that's not.
No.
That's why we're talking about the crime against humanity, because every person in the occupied territory is a victim of of Russia's crimes. So the atmosphere of fear that people are living, they do not have their basic human rights are daily violated, like from the right to live, right to the freedom of movement, the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly. Each human rights in the occupation is violated. And it's very dangerous for them to comment on this, because you can find yourself locked and being tortured in a CISO or etc. on these detention facilities.
It's interesting that you talk about like journalists reaching out saying, "Can you connect us to somebody?"
Human rights groups
and that reveals. And I don't mean to be overly, although I often am a high critic of the International Press Corps, that reveals the ignorance of what the West doesn't understand about Russia.
Unfortunately.
To even ask that is to reveal that you don't understand the control, the fear, all the rest of it. How can we better educate people, particularly in the West, of what it means to live under Russian occupation, do you think? And just your personal opinion.
My personal opinion that we need to have a very good and very big informational campaign. Like we need to produce media content in Russia do have lots of resources to spread propaganda all over the world. And Russia has been doing that for decades. Unfortunately, Ukraine didn't have such a huge media financial resource to even establish media in different countries. Still, we do have attention of the world's media. And I'm not saying that is bad to talk about the human rights violations in the occupied territories of Ukraine. That I'm very grateful for the interest and that they're showing what's happening. But they need to understand that in many ways you cannot ask to contact you with the person from the occupied territory, because you are endangering this person a lot. Mm-hmm. So that was my point. Like you can gather information from human rights organizations, or there are some people that in the occupied territories that want to reach media, and they are they're safe and secure. They know what channels to use, in what messengers to communicate, etc. So if a person is willing to talk and a person understands the risks and can secure herself, that is absolutely great. Still, that is a huge question you ask, because there are so much happening in the world, and Ukraine and the territories territory of which there is like the biggest war after the Second World War, needs to seek an attention, like needs to finding its way through different news that are happening in the world. And we need to understand that it's not only about us, of course, but still, I think, but mostly these are Ukrainians who needs to make everything to Ukraine to be in a world's agenda, informational agenda. So, and like we have journalists like you, but you prefer podcaster? I don't know.
Journalist, I suppose.
Journalists, like
podcaster
you,
works too.
and that is great. Like those journalists who actually visits Ukraine, who probably spend some time in Ukraine, and this is the best way. If you live in somewhere for some time, you can better understand the situation, and you can better explain the situation to your audience, people. Yes. So
where do you think the international community has done when it comes to looking at Russian crimes? Where's the international community done good work, and where do you think they could improve?
Well, that is a very wide question, because like there are different sides of. You mean like accountability issues?
Accountability, documentation.
As for documentation, we have a UN Commission of Inquiry that's working from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and luckily its mandate were prolonged for another year. So we very appreciate the work that UN Commission of Inquiry do in Ukraine. So like what we see and what we write in our analytical reports about Russian crimes, we see that UN Commission of Inquiry, an independent commission, C2, and UN, like, this is a large, this is large, and it's not like there was a question of aren't Ukrainian prejudice, like, etc. So, because we live in a war, etc., etc. But if you think so, here you go, the UN Commission of Inquiry report. You can read it, and you can read everything about Russia's crime in Ukraine. So also we have like the world's support. Some countries open the investigations using the tool of universal jurisdiction. Like recently, I think months ago or some, probably you heard the Russian soldier from the Rusich group, Jan
which
Petrovsky,
is
and
a fascist military group.
Yes, that were committing crimes since 2014. So that he was convicted in Finland. That is a huge help. Like when the countries that do have this, that did implement the universal jurisdiction, I think there are over 12 countries that are investigating cases regarding the Russia's war crimes in Ukraine. So that is a huge support.
And you already mentioned Belova and Putin being in the ICC.
Yeah, so the ICC, of course. Sorry,
how much
stuck
hope,
in your chair.
How much hope do you have that these criminals will face, some sort of punishment?
Yeah. Well, I'm quite tired of hoping, so I'm more about doing, and I think the Ukraine is more about doing than hoping. Well, I see that lots of mechanisms, international mechanisms of accountability, cannot be fully implemented till the war wouldn't until the Ukraine's victory.
Mm-hmm.
So, but still, this is important to collect, preserve, save, and share evidence and testimonies, and to collect them, because even in, I don't know, 10, 20 years, I think that accountability, I don't know in which form this accountability will be, like which form it will take. But still, I do believe that Russia will pay for its crimes, and that Putin and like the heads of Russia's military and military commanders and political leaders will have what they deserve. I would say like that. Still, even the accountability, it's not only about the criminals, it's also about the justice for the survivors. And the justice is also a huge and a big word, and it can come in many forms, like from the reparations, which is so we used to think that we will get reparations after the war will be end, but it's not like that. And Ukraine's experience show that there are already some mechanisms that are working, like the register of damage that were launched by the Council of Europe and other. So they are already working, and what we need to do is to improve those mechanisms, and in some way we need to create new, and we have like an extra new experience in that. So sadly, yes.
And obviously, as we've seen in previous persecution of or prosecution rather of war crimes, it takes a long time. But how important is it to document it now while it's happening, while it's fresh, even if it takes 10 years to, what is your mindset when you're going and taking testimony and collecting evidence that this is urgent? It needs to be done right now. How much of that is in your mind?
That's in my mind because the standards we're working on are about that you need to collect evidence as fast as possible. And you need to contact, like we are a human rights organization. And when we started documented crimes, we were the first one establishing contact with the survivors. And we were contacting them with the Ukrainian law enforcement, like with national police, with the prosecutor office, the prosecutor office. So we were just a linking the survivors with the law enforcement that actually are investigating the cases. So we can collect information, gather information from open sources, but still we do not have those resources, and like we're not the prosecutors. So you do understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's important to get it.
Yes, it's very important. It's very important to get it to as soon as possible. But still, I find myself in a situation when I'm a human also, and lots of people are disappointed that the justice can't come in a minute. So, and I am disappointed too, unfortunately. But still, we have an opportunity to help people, like to provide them. Because lots of the survivors that undergone torture, that undergone inhumane treatment, that were held for months without access to fresh air, to daylight, to food, proper food, water, etc. So that it's resulted in a huge, not only physical but also mental problems, and it's very important to help people like right now. So it's very important to Ukraine to create a complex system of rehabilitation, medical assistance, etc. for survivors. Still, there are mostly human rights organizations, international and national, are dealing with this. Still, my point was, it's important to help people. Like if they have, lots of them lost their homes because of shelling, or because that their homes are still in the occupied territories, so they need any possible support they can find, and we are like redirecting. If we cannot provide, we can provide legal assistance, for example, but if we cannot provide rehabilitation for a person, but we know the organization that can, and so we are redirecting victims between NGOs.
Even with international organizations or individual, countries that want to help, these are large groups. I am sure that there are individuals out there who are hearing what you're saying and are feeling that they want to help. How can just your average person help these Ukrainian victims of Russian crime? I mean, is there a way for just your average person to do something?
There is a way to help Ukraine, by reaching out to your politicians about what Ukraine needs to win the war, and winning the war means helping Ukrainians. Still, you can donate to Ukrainian NGOs that are working with the survivors. You can share you can subscribe on their web pages, like Facebook, Instagram, etc. Our organization even have TikTok, so you can subscribe, you can follow our news, and you can share the information you will receive from our content with your friends, etc. So, and make people more aware of what is happening in Ukraine. And when you're more aware, you better see how to help, actually. So, yeah, that would be.
There's another thing about all of this, and that is, and I want to ask you this, as a Ukrainian, not solely as an investigator or somebody documenting this thing, but also as a Ukrainian. When Ukrainians hear these stories from the occupied territories, how does your average Ukrainian react to hearing these tales of what the Russians are doing? What is public opinion within Ukraine? How does it respond to these stories, do you think?
Can you be more specific?
I mean, does it? I guess what I'm getting at is that I'm aware that many Ukrainians this makes them very angry.
Of course.
Of course. But it also makes them stronger to resist Russia because they know they don't want that to happen in their village. Is what Russia is doing and the stories that get out to other Ukrainians, does that contribute to their strength and their resistance, and in what way? I mean,
you are answering your own question.
Well, no, I'm trying to phrase the question so that maybe you can explain to my audience what this does to affect Ukrainians. What do these stories do?
You just understand that you need to do more to bring Ukrainians victory. You need to donate, you need to join Ukrainian army if you didn't join, if you're both woman or man. I'm also thinking about that. So you need to support initiatives that are helping Ukrainian army, Ukrainian veterans, etc. So we are in a war and we need to fight, and each of us on its place. But if you're not involved in the war, you need to get involved. So yes, we feel angry about it, but angry is is a fuel, but you cannot be angry for a long time. You just need to work. You have problem. You need to fix this problem. So to speak like in those terms,
Yeah, it's exhausting.
You can also find a way how to help. So there is a problem like some people that are trying to, it's very hard actually to leave the occupied territory.
Mhm.
It costs a lot. It's a long way. So if you're a person like over 70 years old, if you have some illnesses, it's a very long and hard trip for you to leave the occupied territory through different countries. You need to like spend at least 3 days just to leave the occupation. Some of people have a bit to leave the occupied territories, especially those who were like illegally detained and then they were released. Most of them cannot leave the occupation because Russian authorities forbid them to do so. So you are released from the from the legal place of detention, but you're not free still because you need to remain in the occupation. Yes, and lots of people like they find themselves that they do not have money to leave the occupied territory, that they have some relatives that cannot walk by themselves, like elderly people, etc. And there are even they can reach the territory of Russia and then they do not know how and where to go and where to find money. And there are organizations that help such Ukrainians, but still, unfortunately, they struggle with the finances.
Yeah. And as we kind of draw to a close here, there's also the question of a lot of people are saying that there is going to have to be land given up for peace. That leaves some Ukrainians living under Russian control. I mean, how disturbing is that to you that it might come to a place where Ukrainians are going to have to live under Moscow's thumb?
That is very disturbing to me. And regarding those recent negotiations, like that Trump is conducting with Russia, and we do not hear much about the people that you heard his statements like Ukraine might lose some territories or no. Like it's painful to hear that in Ukraine because you have relatives, you have friends that lives in the occupied territories. You know how it is to them. You know that they like living in. It's exaggeration a bit, but in a concentration camp. Probably this is a bad comparison. Sorry,
Yeah,
but you have no freedom, and you in constant risk of being tortured, arrested, killed, etc. So you cannot express your views openly. You cannot even listen to Ukrainian music or do anything that connects into Ukraine. Like, so someone is trying to erase your identity. You live in a hostile environment where everyone, when you're very suspicious to everyone, and when you understand that you are rightless, you have absolutely no right. So it sounds actually, that sounds for you, how that sounds for you. That is how to live in the occupied territory. And when someone says, like someone who have lots of power, doesn't care about, well, you will remain living in the occupied territory. You will remain living without any rights. So, like, yeah.
That's got to be difficult for you and for most Ukrainians, I think. What do you think the future is going to be for those people who are living under occupation and for those criminals who have done these things, the Russians? Do you have hopeful thoughts, and where do you have hopeful thoughts? Where do you have negative thoughts?
we're like living in the situation might change any moment in any unimaginable direction. Like we live in a crazy times actually. So, and I'm trying not to think in this perspective, like, and in these categories, because these are very philosophical. What's gonna be to perpetrators and what's gonna be to victims? I hope it's gonna be like it's need to be. The perpetrators will be punished. The survivors will receive justice. What in my thoughts now is how we can liberate those Ukrainians that were illegally detained by Russia and are still in illegal detention. Like we're talking about thousands of Ukrainians. We even do not know exact number because Russia do not provide any information about these people. So lots of them are held in inhumane conditions for years. It's not only about those who were illegally detained in 2022, but earlier, before the full-scale invasion. So they're held in inhumane conditions. Thousands of them are under illegal persecution. So Russia is also violating a right to a fair trial in a tremendous way. Like it's also it may amount to crime against humanity, because we see that like Russia is using its court system, its like legislation, court system, law enforcement to persecute Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm.
Like they open criminal cases against people and they're like convicting them in espionage, terrorism, etc., and sentenced to at least 10 or more years of prison. So, and we know
and
that.
Are you aware of any international body that is allowed to do investigations on that side, within Russia? Is there anybody?
There is the International Red Cross,
Mm-hmm.
who has a mandate at least to visit the places of illegal detention to seek information about person, and we see that it unfortunately doesn't work effectively. Unfortunately, still there are possible ways to create monitoring initiatives, and I won't go very deep into that, but there is a possibility, and I hope this will work. So this is another huge issue. Like we were discussing deportation of children, torture, and the situation with the civilians that are still in illegally in the places of detention in the territory of Russia. And there are lots of such places, like through all over this huge country. And we're talking about thousands of people, at least. Like there are different numbers. I don't want to say any, but more than 8,000 of civilians that are illegally deprived of liberty. That are most of them. About most of them, we do not know anything. There was recently a case about the mayor of Dnipro-Rudne. It's the Zaporizhzhia region, Yevhen Matveyev, whose body was returned after 3 years. Like he was kidnapped by Russian officers in 2022 in March, and his body was returned with the signs of torture. So, and for most of this time, we family didn't know anything about him, but he was then like the internet ICRC confirmed that he is in Russian detention, and still they didn't provide family with the exact place where is he held. And then they return his body, and so the deaths in detention are also common. We documented at least 10 cases of deaths of civilians in detention. Yeah.
Well, just one last word. Is there anything else you'd like to tell my audience about, what is happening in regards to Russian crimes here in Ukraine? Is there a kind of some other message, some last words you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would say, to continue my last point, I would say that the issue of Ukrainian civilians that were legally deprived of liberty by Russia isn't very covered and very known internationally. So when we're talking to our foreign colleagues, they cannot understand the essence of what is that? Why are so many civilians are detained by Russia, and who are they? So I would probably suggest to subscribe on our YouTube channel. We have
We will
several
include the links, I promise you. Yes.
videos in which we tried to explain this and to share the information about civilians that were legally detained and about the crimes that were committing against them. So
Awareness.
Yeah,
awareness is the most important thing. Yeah. Lisa Sukharenko,
yes,
I appreciate you coming to speak to us today. This is obviously a very important topic that we try to keep in people's minds as much as we possibly can. We will include links to your work, ways, if there are any that you would like to provide us to, so that my audience can support you, if only just in terms of awareness, but if there are monetary ways of doing it or other things, we would be happy to promote you, because I think the work that you are doing is very important. So thank you for coming and spending time with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for what you're doing here in Ukraine. I hope
you were fantastic.
I hope people will understand.
Yes, don't worry about English. That. No, that's okay. You're doing us a great favor, and by helping the people of Ukraine, I believe you're actually helping the entire global community to recognize what kind of a criminal terrorist state Russia truly is. Thanks once again.
Thank you.